but one thing I'm really interested in is I'm not sure if you've watched any, but I really like animes. Okay,
I watched anime.
you
But
haven't watched anime.
tell me about anime.
Yeah, so animes, well, not all of them, but the good ones. I can give you examples like something that is very famous these days is Attack on Titan, and another one that was famous like 20 years ago was Naruto. They all have a very complicating timeline. Like
Hmm.
there are constant links between the future and the past and the present. And at one point you just sit down and you have a wow moment. Um, so do we have different types of plots, or is a plot always a straight line and then it's the narrating of the story that changes that?
No, no, plot is not always in a straight line. I mean, the typical way that you draw a plot. So
Hmm.
when teachers are drawing plots when they're teaching it to kids,
Yeah.
it starts at the bottom, and then it all kind of rises up and rises up and rises up like a mountain, and then it gets to the climax at the top, and then
Yeah.
starts to go down, and then
Yeah.
you're done, right? So it kind of looks like that, like a line graph would. Um, with Whenever you're getting into complicated plots, right? Like the ones that you're talking about with anime, often the ones that have anything to do with time travel are the same way.
Hmm.
Uh, all of those things, there can be multiple plot lines
Hmm.
throughout a story, and the more complicated a story, the more, or oftentimes, if we're talking about like a regular novel that's 300 or 400 pages, there can be 2 or 3 storylines going on at once.
Hmm.
um Most of the time, unless you're talking about a short story
Yeah.
or like a sitcom, right, a 30-minute TV show, you're only dealing with one plot line on the short ones.
Yeah.
The longer the story, the more they're going to be. And
I
then
see.
you can get into the time travel stuff and how everything's connected. Most of the time, though, with the longer books, they're all connected somehow. There can be 3 or 4 different, like, let's talk about, like, Game of Thrones is a perfect example of this, right? When you
Yeah.
start reading Game of Thrones, we're going to talk about the books, the Game of Thrones books, right?
Yeah.
Um, those are brilliantly written for a lot of different reasons, but essentially what happens is that every character, when you read the books, right, you get there and it starts with, at the top of the chapter, it tells you the name of the person that you're following. And so you're following that person's plot line. And then you go to the next chapter and you're at another character and you're looking at another character's plot line. But the reason why those books are so brilliant is because you have all the individual characters' storylines, and they all funnel into a main storyline, right? They all feed into the main storyline. So you're getting 20 different storylines that all feed into the same thing.
Yeah. And it creates a masterpiece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It does.
it's very well done. I mean, from a writing perspective, it's brilliantly done, and it's hard to do. It also makes it hard to read, right?
Definitely.
Because what happens is that there are the characters that you like and there are the characters that you don't like. So you'll get to a part where you finish a character, like I wasn't a fan of any of the Lannisters. So I'd get to so I'd be reading a chapter about, I don't know, Dany or Arya or Jon Snow or whoever. I'd be reading a chapter about them, and then I get to the end of the chapter, and then we're getting a Lannister, and it's like I don't want to read. I don't care about Jaime Lannister, so I'd put the book down, and then I'd go do something else. Where if I'm reading a book that I really like, it doesn't matter if I end a chapter.
Yeah.
I'm to see what's next. But because what's next in the Game of Thrones books isn't what I was reading, I don't care. So it took me forever to get through those books. Where,
So that was a downside.
it was the downside. I mean, but you have to, but there's a commitment with Game of Thrones. Like you
Yeah.
have to,
It's a creed.
it's
It's more than a book.
there's a commitment. But yeah, so oftentimes, but back to your point, yes, there are oftentimes many different plot lines, and longer books will have more than one that all feed into the same one.
I see, and I just need to point out that one of our dear viewers has requested to be part of the live. Friends, we're gonna take requests after Julia finishes her lecture. Would be happy to do so, but well, yeah, because of the time limitation. So yeah, let's go. So we were before I rudely interrupted you, we were talking about conflicts and the fact that conflicts occur depending on the way a character looks at the world. Right. So to I don't know, to Jon Snow, maybe a snowstorm would be nothing, but to, who knows, Robert Baratheon, snow would, or
Danny, right? Danny Targaryen, right?
Danny comes from the desert. Yeah, no, so that's not, no, right. That's a big no.
Exactly. So, but this brings up a good point about characters, right? So it is very important that authors understand characters and who they are, and what shapes them. So characters, just like people, characters are people. So you have to think about what shapes a person. So what has made you, right, is a combination of a lot of things. It's a combination of who your parents were, how you were raised, where you were raised, right? If you grew up in New York City, your life is going to look very different than if you grew up in a farm in Kansas, or if you grew up on a mountain in Finland. Are there mountains in Finland? If you
we have mountains in Iran, we can give that as an example.
Yeah, a mountain in Iran, or a mountain somewhere. Your life is going to look very different depending on where that is, right?
Yeah.
It also includes what their personalities are. Just kind of naturally, are they more outgoing and boisterous? Are they more quiet and reserved? How many siblings they have? There's a whole psychology behind the personalities based on whether or not you were the firstborn, the middleborn, or the youngest.
Yeah.
You've got where they work, what they decided to do for a living, and why. What they like to do for fun, what their religious beliefs are, and how those are different than the religious beliefs that they were raised with, right? Think about all of the things that make you and that shape who you are and how you interact with the world. And then think about all of those things that make your friend them, or your sister or your brother them, or your parents, right? Think about all of the good, bad, indifferent things that have happened that they've decided to do will shape who that person is. And that once you understand those characters, that's how you're going to be able to figure out how each of those characters is going to relate to the plot line and whether or not it becomes a conflict.
I see. You just opened my eyes.
Long way to say it, but you like, or was that clear? Should we use an example?
More than clear. That was great. But yeah, let's do an example.
Let's do an example. So we're going to talk about the Hunger Games books, because this is what so there were a few different books you and I had talked about earlier today. There were a few different book series that we could talk about. So the ones that I'm going to do, we're going to start with Hunger Games, because I think because it covers a lot of these things, right?
Yeah.
So there are a whole series of books by Susan Collins. We talk about the plot line. There's a world, and the type of world that's called dystopian. Dystopian, which is essentially, it's a world that we don't want to live in. So if you have a utopia, like the word utopia is a world that's like the perfect place where everybody
to live.
The perfect place to be. And then the opposite of that is a dystopian world where no one wants to be. Right?
I see.
So the world that we are at is a dystopian world. There is an area, the world is separated into districts. There are districts that are very wealthy. There are few districts that are very wealthy and a lot of districts that are very poor. And all of the poor districts need to essentially do everything so that the rich districts get everything that they need.
Yeah.
In the poor districts, food is rationed. And if children want extra food, they need to put their name into a lottery. Every time they ask for extra food, their name goes into a lottery. And at the end of the year, the rich districts choose who then will go into a competition to decide who wins. And and at the end, there's one person that lives, and all of the rest of the people die, right? That are in this competition.
Yeah.
Did I pretty much describe the plot pretty well?
Perfectly.
Okay. So in here, so that's the plot. So then we have one girl, her name is Katniss Everdeen. Her sister, whose name is her sister Prue. Prue? No, Prue wasn't her sister. Her sister anyway.
Yeah.
For reasons I'm not remembering.
Ruth? No.
It'll come to me.
Yeah.
Her sister's name is pulled in the lottery, and she now has to go to this competition. Katniss knows that there's no way her sister is going to survive, so Katniss then volunteers to take her place. Right? Yeah. And so the rest of the storyline is about the characters and how they are interacting with the competition. Right? So that's where all the conflict comes in. You've got conflicts that are Katniss versus herself, because she's got to deal with the fact that she will probably die. You've got Katniss versus society, because she doesn't like the fact that she has to do this competition. You've got Katniss versus nature, because they kind of simulate nature, right?
Yeah.
And she gets attacked by animals, and she gets attacked by trees and all kinds of things. Yeah. You've got Katniss versus other people, because she's competing against the other people that are in the lottery. You've got Katniss versus technology, because in the competition, all of the nature that we've talked about is actually simulated. So there's technology.
Yeah.
And then when you get to the last book, you have Katniss versus her destiny, right? She becomes the Mockingjay, and she becomes the one that everybody is believing is the savior. So her destiny, the fact that she's got all of these things. So in how Katniss relates to all of those things, in order to understand that, we have to know that Katniss was very poor, that she often had to kill her own meat to feed the family, because they weren't given enough. And so that's why she knows how to use a bow and arrow well. You have the fact that she's the older sibling, so she feels like she needs to protect her sister.
Yeah.
The fact that her father died, so Katniss then had to come in and protect the family and provide for the family, because her mother was too upset and distraught over the death of her father to do that. So you have to know all of these things about Katniss's background to feed why she's doing everything that she is and why she's able to survive. Does that make sense?
That's perfect. And because I've seen the movie, and I'm sure most people have seen it, we get a very clear picture of what you're saying. Yeah.
Of how that works. So, but the thing about character development, right, is character development can go on for a very long time. And oftentimes it happens in your head. And it can happen long after a book is written. There's an author named Anne Rice who passed away in the last few years, but she was a writer for years and years and years. She wrote the Interview with the Vampire series. She kind of wrote more fantasy, kind of darker fantasy books, vampires and witches and that kind of stuff. And she wrote the whole Interview with the Vampire series in the 1990s, and then set them down And then towards the end of her life, she picked it up again. But what was interesting, I was following her on Facebook. She actually had a very interactive Facebook page. And what she would do is at the end of the night, sometimes she would write a long thing that says, Lestat, who's her kind of main vampire character, the one that she loved so much, she would be able to, she knew Lestat so well that she would tell people that followed her on Facebook how Lestat reacted to things that were happening in the world now. So even though, like, in the books, they happened in the 1700s or they happened in the 1980s, she would talk about what Lestat thought about President Obama.
Yeah.
Or she'd talk about what Lestat thought about a certain kind of music. Because she knew him so well, she actually could hear his reactions in her head, and then she was able to kind of write them.
I see.
And other authors like J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter series, has entire character sketches for characters we barely meet in the books. So, like, Harry Potter, for those that don't know, there are five boys that live in Harry Potter's kind of dorm room, right? There's Ron, Neville, and Harry, and then there's also Dean Thomas and Seamus Finnegan. We see them, they have a couple of lines in the books and they have a couple of lines in the movies, but they don't really participate in the main story plot line. She has pages of genealogies of what their magical genealogies are, how many generations back their magical families are. She understands what shaped these two characters. She understands the way that they are, even though we barely see them. So you can create things like this without actually